Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's our weekly voyage of discovery in the wonderful world of books. Books that I've been reading and authors I've been interviewing. And today we're joined by Sandra Bonura, or Sandy as she likes to be known. She is a historian coming to us from California. That's right, San Diego to be exact. And she's written a wonderful biography called The Sugar King of California. This, friends, is maybe the best biography I've read in over 20 years. Forget all the other ones you may have heard about. This is one you want to read. It's well written. It tells a story about one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest man in California during the Gilded Age. Yeah, Claus Spreckels. You know Klaus. You never heard of Klaus? No, no one heard of Klaus. Not until Sandy Bonura writes this book. What a story. He becomes a sugar king. He comes from Germany with 75 cents in his pocket back in the 1840s. And by the time he dies, he is so wealthy. He's accumulated so much wealth from going from a dry goods person to having a beer company to then becoming the king of sugar. He became the sugar king of California with sugar beets. Sugar beets. Then he went to Hawaii with sugar cane. He was out there. He became the biggest out in Hawaii until all those missionary kids, hmm, their kid, the congregational missionary kids drove him out, as well as overthrowing the king. So he comes back to America, becomes even bigger and bigger. It is unbelievable. The story that this man has, his life was outstanding. Unfortunately, there is so much dissension within the family. Father sues son, son sues father, brother sues brother, sister. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. But the man was ingenious. He was an innovator. He did good things. He was loved by his people, loved by his employees. But we didn't even get to it, but every day, every employee, free beer at lunch, free beer when you're done with work. Yep, that's Claus Spreckels. He loved them. And it's just a wonderful story, which I think you're going to really enjoy. So why don't we go right to that interview with Sandra Bonura? Welcome, Sandra.
Well, thank you for having me. So nice to meet you.
I have been so excited to talk to you since I got this book. And I knew it was going to be a few months in the future, but I couldn't stop reading this thing. It was just a great book. The Sugar King of California. Just a wonderful book. But before we get into the Sugar King, let's talk a little bit about you because you're a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful writer. Tell us a little about where you grew up, where you go to college, and you eventually became a college professor, if I'm not mistaken.
Through a series of twists and turns, I became a college professor. First, I went to Hollywood and I worked in behind the scenes in the recording industry, recording, labels. That was crazy time during the 70s in Hollywood. And then I never did anything good in school. I was not a good student in school, but I could write. So that was I was good speller and a good writer in school. So when I went back to school, I started taking these writing classes at adult schools. And I thought, I'm not bad. So, but I didn't do anything about it. I decided to be a teacher. So I was a elementary school teacher. Then I loved it so much because I was such a naughty kid. I became a school counselor because I certainly saw my fair share of them going as a student. So I became a school counselor, then I taught high school, and then seriously, through some great, little things that just happened, I became a college professor, and I went to Northern Arizona University because, um, I had to commute there, of course, because I lived in San Diego, it wasn't that far, but it was hard, leave my kids and dogs and husband behind and go to Arizona to get this dream fulfilled because once I taught one college class, I thought, "That's it. I've met my crowd. These are my people." So I taught the next generation of teachers and school counselors and school psychologists. So that was my career. I retired from Chapman University.
Well, now, you went up to Flagstaff, home of the Lumberjacks.
Go Lumberjacks!
That's right. That's right. One of my best friends in law school was a alumni of Northern Arizona, so I always keep up with the Jacks. So wow. Okay, so then you came back to Chapman College in California, and then retired. Did you retire officially? Are you teaching now? What's the status?
Well, after I retired, I really, really missed teaching. So I began adjuncting after that. But I had already started writing on the job during my last years of teaching at Chapman University. Um, the we have a big famous institution here in San Diego. It's called the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. And my husband worked with the husband of the archivist there at Scripps. They were well acquainted with oceanography, historical documents. But one day, the archivist, her name was Deborah. Her name is Deborah. She contacted me and asked me if I wanted to read some love letters. And I said, love letters? From who? She says they're missionary teacher letters from 1890 to 1893. And she says, Sandy, I know you're a teacher educator. And this was a young teacher going off to teach Hawaiian girls at a boarding school. And I know you love Hawaii. You're going to love these letters. And I said, okay, send them on. And I printed them out in my office at Chapman, never realizing they would be this stacked. I mean, I used 2 reams of paper trying to hide it from my colleagues. I said, "What are you doing in there?" My printer was going crazy. And then I put them aside, and that was probably 2008. And I never looked at these letters again, but life happened to me. My mother, was dying, and I was looking for some distraction, and I came across those letters, and I began reading these love letters from a missionary teacher to her fiancé who was getting a zoology degree at Harvard. And these letters started talking about the Hawaiian, which she called the revolution, which was actually the coup d'etat. It was the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy by a group of missionary descendants. And she's chronicling these being really in the mix of this, and I became fascinated. I said, "Nowhere in the world did I ever read in my history books about how America got a hold of the Hawaiian Islands and who did it." And I had to edit these letters. I mean, again, letters, to make it interesting. I had to learn who all the players were in history, both in United States history and in Hawaiian. And, I became a historian in that year because I had to learn. I researched everything, and I asked the archivist if we could make a book out of this. I said, "This is a book?" She says, "You've never written a book." And I said, "Well, I've written, scholarly articles. I could probably write a book." She said, "Well, this isn't a book." And I'm like, "I'm so fascinated. Maybe it is a book." And so, long story short, I submitted it. It was published by University of Hawaii Press. It was called American Girl in the Hawaiian Islands: The Letters of Carrie Prudence Winter. And rare, rare, rare. She partnered, all the teachers actually partnered with Queen Liliuokalani, Hawaii's last king. And so it was an epistolary, which means they're just letters. I didn't provide the context. Every single letter was found in its original envelope, stacked up because Carrie Prudence Winter never had any children to destroy her stuff. So they were found, and so a century later, that became a book. During the writing, and then I had to travel back and forth to Hawaii to research archives. And in those days, things weren't as digitized as they are today. There was really a lot of work, sweat labor, going to the Kamehameha School archives, the Hawaii State Archives, the library, interviewing people who might have been descendants of this Hawaiian school. And my life changed. It changed. It's like I became alive and I couldn't wait to retire to start this life. So it has been so magnificent. During the editing of those letters, one woman kept jumping out to me. Her name was Ida Pope. Very different than the rest of the missionary teachers who are these prude congregational missionaries. She was Presbyterian from the Midwest, not New England, and she was a first generation of American women. So she graduated from Oberlin University in 1888. Her whole cohort um, was just inspiring to me. They were women getting an education, but they couldn't even read their own graduation speeches. A man had to do it. So it was interesting times. But Ida May Pope, what a revolutionary. So, long story short, again, um, my second book was called Light in the Queen's Garden, Ida May Pope. Um, I can't remember the book. I've written 4 books since then. Ida May Pope, Light in the Queen's Garden, Ida May Pope. Oh my gosh, for Hawaii's Daughters. I can't believe this is so embarrassing. But that's what 69 looks like. So that woman gave her life for Hawaiian girls for 25 years. She changed labor laws. She advocated for women's rights in Hawaii. Um, Unbelievable no one wrote her biography. I said, that woman had to have a biography. She was the most ignored person in history in my heart. So, when I was in Hawaii doing research, the name Spreckels kept popping up from these. I'm going, "Spreckels? I know that name because I live in San Diego." And Spreckels, with the Spreckels Theater. My grandma lived in, dwellings across the street downtown from the Spreckels Theater. We have the Spreckels Organ Pavilion in Balboa Park I used to go to with my nana, and so the Spreckels name, Spreckels, we used to say, she's German, and, when I started keeping that research to the side, so I've now finished American Girl. She came from the trunk. I finished, this is a trunk in Berkeley that was donated to Scripps Institution if I didn't make that point. And then the Spreckels book, um, I began to, while the other book was in production, I had time on my hands. I thought, let me just look at this John D. Spreckels. And why is he being mentioned all over Hawaii? Well, oh my gosh, very controversial. He and his father.
Klaus Spreckels. This is a book about Klaus Spreckels, okay? He is called the Sugar King. And I'm going to take this moment here just to show everybody the beautiful, absolutely beautiful cover, which comes from a postcard out there in Hawaii. But this man was one of the wealthiest men in America. Why don't we know anything about him until you gave us this biography? What happened to him?
Well, I kind of know what happened. Same as his son John D. in San Diego was ignored, and he was ignored from the whole state, was because of family. Family fractured. I mean, I've never you this family became so fractured. They sued each other in life and after death, and that passed down to the descendants. And the Spreckles descendants married people who weren't above board with finances, and it was just so sad, so awful what happened because had his sons forgiven each other, and forgot, I wonder what the Spreckles name would be today.
Right. Absolutely. Well, now, Klaus Spreckels comes over, and I'm going to just shortchange a little bit here. Uh, he comes over at a young age with 75 cents in his pocket. Okay. Comes from Germany. And tell us a little about that Hungry 40s in the Germany. I think it's called the Hungry 40s and how it affected Klaus.
Right. Well, it wasn't called the Hungry 40s until we're looking back on history. But just as Klaus was entering manhood, he was 17, all around him, all across Germany, everyday life was changing for everybody in Europe. So the 1840s was soon to be known in Northern Europe as the Hungry 40s. So this was a period of terrible economic deprivation, social unrest, political revolution, of historic proportions. That's why there's been so many books written about the Hungry 40s. The immediate cause was the European famine of that decade. And we all know about the massive failure of the potato crops, and we link that to Ireland because unfortunately they were a one crop economy in Ireland. Potatoes were it, one crop. But when it spread across Europe to the wheat grains and those two basic staple foods, potatoes and bread grains, that led to historic food shortages. And there we go, and a lot of crime, famine related crime. So Klaus got out of Germany not only because of the poverty, but because Germany, not then Germany, right? That was Hanover and the Kingdom of Prussia at that time. They had a law. You're 18, you're going to war. You were instantly conscripted for war. So I'm sure all boys, young Klaus was a farmer and he was a poor farmer. His family weren't just farmers, they were tenant farmers. So they didn't even own the land in Hanover, well, village in Lamstead. So all the boys got together, and said, "What are you going to do? How are you going to hide? We're not going to war." Because, I mean, you wouldn't come home possibly. Plus, it was the famine. So Klaus, he boldly, because he didn't have any money, because his family had no money, 75 cents was what that is equivalent to. He landed in South Carolina, not New York like a lot of ones. We don't know why he went to South Carolina. He never mentioned that in any documents I could find, but there he was in Charleston and, no could speak absolutely no English, and he didn't wanna go work on another farm like a lot of German immigrants. He says, "I'm not gonna learn English if I go to a farm. I'm gonna work in shops so I can interact with people." He was very smart, very strategic in the decisions he made as a young man who turned 18 in Charleston, South Carolina, working for a shopkeeper.
He was almost run out of Charleston, wasn't he? Because of who he sold his goods to.
Oh, yeah. He was going to either go to jail, be fined, or both, because he sold liquor to Negroes, and these were slaves, and it was against the law, and I have the exact citation found that promised such a thing. So he took off, and when he took off with his newly born son, John D. Spreckels, who was born in Charleston. That's my other biography, Empire Builders, on him. And his girlfriend, his sweetheart from Hanover, Anna Mangels, has now arrived on the scene to be his wife. And they together, after again some circuitous ways, end up going to San Francisco just after the gold rush. And now the Panama Canal hadn't been built. So this is no easy thing to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. You're going around Cape Horn. How many months do you think it took? I mean, depends on weather conditions, isn't it? But I'd say 6 months. So there he went. He was going to go, but he decided, good, efficient Klaus, I'm going to go through the isthmus. And that was very dangerous, but you would shave off a lot of miles by doing so. And probably was cheaper. But it was malaria ridden, you'd be robbed, there was all sorts of transportation. So as a mom, I'm like, "You're taking your kid and your wife," and by then they have 2 kids, on through the isthmus, and so he ended up in San Francisco in just a wild, wild west atmosphere at that time and opens up his own store because he has saved every penny. He is a saver. And he has every penny to open up a dry goods store in San Francisco, and with his wife and two children.
And then that wasn't enough. No, he saw that he could make more money and do better, and he decides I think he wants to get into sugar. But I think he goes back to Germany before he makes that decision, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. So from being shopkeeper, our Klaus was restless. He was a restless boy all around, he wanted something new. He jumped from storekeeper to brewery master. So he actually developed Anchor beer, which is, steam beer. And then next door to his brewery and bar was a sugar refinery. And he then got inspired to open up his own sugar refinery. When the Civil War happened, the West, we weren't getting any sugar. In those days, Louisiana grew the sugarcane, which unfortunately fueled a horrible, horrible slave trade, and New York refined the sugar. When the Civil War happened, well, New York and South Carolina, they weren't talking, right? And Louisiana, excuse me, Louisiana grew the cane. They weren't talking. So if no sugar was going back and forth to be refined, you could think how horrible it was in the West. We had no sugar here at all. It was a household luxury. So he went to New York to learn how to refine in the middle of the Civil War, and he took his young son with him, John, and he was there for months and months to learn the trade. He comes back, opens up a refinery in San Francisco, beats the competition big time because he's a go big or go home kind of a guy always. And he's always looking for best practice, modern techniques, um, squeezing every bit of profit out you can and let it be outstanding. So that was his mantra. And always pay cash. If you can't afford it, you're not going to get it. So he learned, and the whole family learned how to live frugally. And he just grew. But after a falling out with his partners who didn't want to expand, didn't want to reinvest their dividends, he got so upset, so horribly outraged, it made every newspaper in San Francisco that this successful sugar refinery is giving it up. But his plan was to go back to Germany and learn because he did farm beets as a lad. And he thought, well, let me go see what beet cultivation looks like in Germany because all of Europe got their sugar from beets. Everyone in America got their sugar from cane. And they look just alike. So when I do my seminars, I take beet sugar and cane sugar with me, and I have someone come up from the audience and say, okay, which is which? People can't tell. So it really is indistinguishable. And he now loves California. He doesn't want to go back to Germany. He loves San Francisco, and he's going to put California on the map. America, I'm going to give you the beats. So that was his plan. But when he came back, all, renewed and inspired to do this, California farmers were like, nah, we're not growing your beets.
Well, yeah, why was
Why?
it that they didn't wanna grow beet? Yeah.
Because it was expensive. See, all of California at that time was a bunch of wheat and cattle. That's what we did. Wheat, the cereal grains. We were dry and dusty and brown California. No green anywhere, basically. So the farmers, remember, this is before the Chinese workforce came in and you could do things like this. And the in California. So, no, they said no. So he pivoted. He went back to a sugar refinery and, because he is that kind of guy, he got the world's largest cane sugar refinery, but always kept beets, those beet seeds in his pocket as a reminder, one day I'm gonna give California beets and we will compete with Europe. So he was that loyal. He never considered himself an immigrant. I'm a American, and, um, and I'm a Californian first and foremost, and we're gonna put on the map. And so, um, he teamed up with some of the people Levi Strauss was his very good friend, and they worked together to market their goods, and they built a railroad together, Levi Strauss and, Claus Spreckels. In fact, Claus Spreckels built 5 railroads. Who does that? So, not well known. Nothing's well known about Claus Spreckels, so I'm pretty excited that this book comes out and it's gonna put him back, give him his rightful place in his history here in California.
One of the things I loved about Klaus Spreckels was anytime he wanted to have check out something, what's new, what's happening. He goes to Germany and he goes undercover, basically. He never tells them he's in the sugar business or does this. He just goes and, says he's a worker. Can I get a job? And then he just studies the industry and brings back all these innovations to America, which just swamps the competition. It's amazing.
Absolutely. he either buys these patents over there or he creates them. I never could get to the bottom of that, but he has these patents he comes back with and he smokes the competition. And, yeah, he goes as an undercover laborer. And, I think he was recruiting on the sly a bunch of the workers too, because before we know it, that San Francisco's full of Northern Germans. Huh. I'm sure hey, so, yeah.
Fascinating. And another thing which I love, there's so many fascinating sugar facts in this book. Friends, you won't want to miss this because we find out about how they used to sell sugar in like pyramids, and there's something called a sugar pincher. We find out about that, and we also find out that Klaus Spreckels has given us, yes, the sugar cube. He invented the sugar cube. I can't get over this man.
Sugar came, like, in these huge, sticky cones or logs, but mostly in cones, and then, retailers would buy them and use their use, tools to break them apart and sugar nippers to punch them, and you could often get cut, and it was messy. But that's what she did. And it took to refine sugar, and I don't remember the facts now, it took a long time to get some fluffy white stuff. Klaus, he fixed it so he'd do it in a day. You can now he "Oh, let's give you powdered sugar. Let's give you liquid sugar. How about a sugar cube?" So, I mean, incredible.
The man was. He was truly ingenious, and I mean, and so much had to do with sugar. But then the next thing we know, wait a minute, wait. Before we go to Hawaii, how many children did he have, and how many survived?
Oh, they had 13 children. And, 19th century childhood diseases are, well known. And it was horrible the way he lost 7 children, and 5 survived, 4 boys and 1 girl. And you see, I've tracked his steps as he loses each child in the book. And you see maybe some of these choices were emotional. It's a horrible thing to lose a child, but to lose 7 of them, mm. And, his 4 sons, they didn't have a choice what kind of occupation they were gonna have. "You're going into the sugar business, boys. Put your fasten your belts."
No doubt, and that, as we will get to in a little bit, maybe that led to family pressures, that led to lawsuits, that led to a lot of unhappiness. Brother against father, brother against brother, sister against oh, you do Wiener Schnitzel. I mean, it was, thought I'd throw that little Pennsylvania Dutch in there. That was just, it was just fascinating. This family, which could have been and should have been even bigger than what they were, kept breaking themselves down and breaking themselves apart. But then they go to Hawaii. Now we go to Hawaii. Got to get to Hawaii because Hawaii is a huge, fascinating thing. He goes to Hawaii and becomes friends with the king. Isn't that amazing? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it was 1876, and the United States wanted Pearl Harbor, and the way we're gonna get Pearl Harbor is to offer a reciprocity treaty. That means your sugar comes into America. Thank you, America. You may use Pearl Harbor for your strategic military base, whatever. And so and when President Grant, who signed the reciprocity treaty, he couldn't even initiate it for a full year. Congress wanted to know who in the hell is Klaus Spreckels stopping this from going forward. So he fought it with every dime because he thought it would ruin his business in California. Next step from Hawaii was California, not the East Coast. So he fought it for a year, but then there's some good stories about what made him change his mind. Those in Hawaii, they were madder than Congress was. So he jumps on the very same ship that a year later in 1877 that goes to inform we finally have Klaus Spreckels' permission to go forward. Klaus is hiding on the ship. He gets over there, and as a congressman, comes with a signed tariff for Hawaii. And then Hawaii was a monarchy, a recognized monarchy with a king and a queen, the whole bit. And so, that story is so big, it's would be hard to condense, for you now, but, he decide when he goes over there on the same ship as a congressman, he went over there before anybody in Hawaii, none of the sugar planters, and those sugar planters were missionary descendants. They weren't the missionaries that came over there from 1820 from 12 different companies. They were the children, the grandchildren of those. So, those missionary, descendants were running Hawaii, these white guys, these white businessmen, these haole businessmen. They ran all of the businesses on, King Street downtown. They sat on the Hawaiian legislature, so they were running the king as well, monitoring that king, keeping him down. Um, and they also planted every bit of arable land in Hawaii in sugarcane. So they were running the sugar business. And the Hawaiian government benefited because they were leasing that land. And they, but anyways, the reciprocity treaty promised to bring more money into Hawaii, which could, their infrastructure was sad. But Klaus, being Klaus, he ran to every island and contracted with every sugar planter for their crops for the next 2 years before they knew what was happening. And then he decided his plans got bigger after going home back to San Francisco. I'm going to go over there and start a sugar plantation. I saw practices that could be improved. These are archaic. Before you know it, he's got the largest sugar plantation in the world in Maui. He's got steam. They call them big puffing monsters in that day because no one ever seen these big steam machines going over there. They were still using donkeys to haul the sugar around. He pulls a train. He brings electricity to Hawaii before the White House, years before the White House. He's putting Hawaii he's hooking up electricity to Hawaii. So, I mean, it is amazing, and he's making enemies along the way, as the readers will read. He's making friends with the king, the merry monarch, who loves a good time, and, I don't wanna spoil it, but boy, oh boy, he's cast as a real villain in history today because they don't understand. I hope this biography finds its way over to Hawaii for some of those researchers to see it in context, but, I can see how he's been, cast as both saint and sinner over there, but, the things they did for Hawaii, he brought in mass amounts of capital into the place where they could upgrade everything.
Yeah, and that see, this is the thing. While the missionary children or grandchildren were running the area, they weren't doing anything to help the Hawaii. They weren't putting in these improvements, infrastructure, whatever you want to call it at the time. It took Klaus to do
What?
this, and here comes Klaus. What a guy!
Thank you, Blaine, absolutely. But I mean, what they were doing was suppressing, the Hawaiian culture. I mean, you couldn't do the hula. When the king wanted to resurrect the hula, you're like, "Oh, I don't think so. We're not lewd and immoral." Besides that being a way they culturally transmit their stories through their hands, speaking a Hawaiian. Oh my gosh, how dare you speak Hawaii in your own country? So, there was some good guys and there were some bad guys, okay? Um, but Klaus came upon him, he was not threatened by them, they despised him because he was an interloper, he was an outsider, and they did everything they could until they, I mean, threatened death down the road. So, pretty spicy story about the things they did to thwart him and drive a wedge between King Kalakaua and Klaus Spreckels.
No doubt about it. And, there are few books that have this. One that I don't know if you ever read this. It's a fictional book. It's called The Last Aloha by Guy Allen Quinn. Well, that was a wonderful book. It sort of reminds me of the book you talked about, where a girl goes over to Hawaii and is there and seeing this whole thing firsthand. And it at the time I ran a book club, and not one of the people in the book club had ever heard about this, knew about the Hawaiian monarchy. It was an amazing thing, but there are finally some things coming out, and your book, your biography, really, really does a great job in documenting how things were, what Klaus has done, and how they eventually got the king out and got Klaus out too. He left. He got out of Dodge, went back to California,
Absolutely.
where he went back to grow sugar beets. Now he's back into sugar beets. Tell us about that.
So once, he tried to help the new queen of Hawaii. He promised her $1 million. The Spreckels family funded her way back home as she fought for her kingdom. So it was just hard, but he then the missionary descendants in Hawaii decided, once they now were in control of the Hawaiian government. King Kalakaua had died in San Francisco. The queen has been dethroned by them, this small group of Hawaiian sugar planters. And they decided, well, gosh, there's just so many things that happened. It's hard to tell you. But beets came when there was no going, when now who was in control of all the sugar for sure were the Hawaiian missionary descendants. And I guess I can fast forward. They became California and Hawaiian sugar. Ever hear of C&H sugar? They did everything download to drive him out of business. They wouldn't give him sugar cane. They did everything they can to do it. And Klaus thought, you know what? I'm not getting any younger. My dream was always to give California crops that we could compete because farmers were poor in California. We were impoverished. Everyone's growing wheat. Who's making any money? So he moves into the Salinas Valley, and that's a great story. This is when I began falling in love myself as his biographer. After all the Hawaiian thing was done, by the way, he had a couple of nervous breakdowns along the way. You could read about that.
Went back to Germany to get cured, right? Go back to Germany, get the cure.
Yeah, they treat nervous breakdowns way different than we do in America, and I cover all that too. I learned so much writing that book. You're just asking me these questions reminded me how much fun I had writing this book. But goes back to Germany, brings back these sugar beets, and now he's got to convince California farmers, I'm your answer. You've got to grow beets. You're not going to make any money. Guess what? I will build your refinery. I'll pay for it. I'll give you the beet seeds. You give me this much land. All you farmers are guaranteed money. And I am just blown away on the methods and technologies he used to get those farmers to sign on. And before you know it, Watsonville, California, which is sort of like, Santa Cruz, go near, not too far from Santa Cruz with the Pajaro Valley. Watsonville becomes a successful beet sugar refinery and puts the city and the surrounding communities on the map. Farmers are now making money. The town is growing with Klaus's sugar beets everywhere. Schools and churches and businesses and homes. Everyone wants to live in Watsonville. So now the United States is going, whoa, look at Watsonville, all these other struggling communities and cities across the country are now contacting Klaus. Teach us. How can we do it? So Klaus becomes the foremost expert on beet cultivation in the United States, telling him how to do it. And he begins growing, and so much is happening with his family. And this is how he suppresses his grief by not giving up on his own dreams, even when his family is falling apart. He chases that dream to the very end, and that was giving California a viable um, economy with beef. Because then he moves down to the Salinas Valley. And so now the state of California now, they used to be brown, this wide brown swath is now green. It's green. Every time I have a salad today, I love Taylor Farm salads. I go, "Thank you, Klaus," because he irrigated California so we could be the salad bowl of America today because of his irrigation. Quite a story.
And for all if any of you out there are fans of John Steinbeck as I am, this is where all his stories are set. They're all set there. I've read every one of his books. I love it. And Yeah, it's amazing what Klaus did, and yet he had just very briefly, let's talk just a little bit about some who was suing who and what was going on. Give us 2 minutes on the litigation that kept going on between these people.
Well, before Beats, um, he went to fight against the Sugar Trust in Philadelphia in the East Coast. That was hell of a fire. Think about Domino Sugar today, right? Big sugar rivalry, big money. He fought the Sugar Trust, and Sugar Trust in those days they fought dirty, and he tried to put Klaus out of business in California. Klaus Spreckels retaliated by building the world's largest sugar refinery in Philadelphia and put his eldest son in charge of that, and his youngest, not his eldest, excuse me, Gus. Gus was his third son, and his youngest at 14. He was like 26. Rudolph was like 17. Put them in charge. It became a huge success. But Klaus was getting up there and he was tired and he wasn't feeling well. And he decided, I'm going to sell out to the enemy. But he did it without telling his son, Gus, who had successfully made that refinery into the success it was. And that was his biggest mistake. So the readers will be amazed at what happens next, how Gus retaliates and gets hold of every one of the bit of the sugar holdings in Hawaii and breaks his father heart, wouldn't understand, and father goes on the attack. And so the youngest brother sides with Gus. They were there together, the two youngest Spreckles brothers, and they rope in the younger sister. So the three of them are against a father and his two eldest sons. Well, one of his eldest sons was a party boy. That's where we get the name Sugar King today, Adolph Spreckles. He married a gold digger named Big Alma today. She's got many books about her. And anyway, he accuses your dad. Guess who pilfered money in the sale of that refinery? Gus. Well, it actually wasn't Gus at all. Might have been Adolf all along, as the reader will see. And so the whole family sued. If you said something, you get a libel lawsuit. And then father sued son sued father. It went on and went on and went on until even in the last days, um, after he died.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, now this is this again, and this can go on and on. There's so many lawsuits there, and as a retired attorney, I enjoyed reading about that. But one of the things that I found fascinating was that he had the oldest boy, John, and they're in California at the time of the earthquake, and John is on death's door. Okay, he is on. They've all basically given him the last rites. I don't know if he wasn't a Catholic, but they're basically giving him the last rites.
Yeah, we're Lutheran.
And oh my God, so how does he get out of how does John get out of San Francisco? This is fascinating. Go ahead, tell us about that a little bit.
Well, good thing he owns a shipping company, and that's how he got out from under his dad's thumb in the first place. He owns the first shipping company to go to Hawaii, Australia, New Zealand. One of his steamships, which by the way gave his dad the vertical integration he needed to become to become California's richest citizen and one of the richest men in the world. That vertical integration that was ultimately accomplished by the shipping company. One of the steamships were at the dock in San Francisco the day of the earthquake. Our John D. Spreckles was carried to that ship. It's a good thing he owned an island down here. It's called Coronado, and he owned a hotel called the Hotel del Coronado. So, which, by the way, King Kalakaua was at just before he died down here at the Hotel del Coronado. So, John D. came down here as a refugee, and it's a miracle that people say, was he being poisoned up there? Is that why he was so sick? What happened when he comes here as well? I don't know, but it was national news because he was a prominent Republican that he was dying. Once the earthquake hit, he's now in San Diego with his family. He is better. He is charged up. He's on a mission. And he begins building our city the way his father built up San Francisco and the surrounding valleys. He poured blood, sweat, tears into San Diego. He was never going to go back to San Francisco. He didn't want to think to do with any of his siblings. He was sick of all of them except for Adolf. And this was where he was going to be his home. And again, ignored. by history, even in San Diego, even though he is the father of modern San Diego. He built our entire infrastructure and superstructure, built our dams, railroad, streetcars. There's nothing John D. He was a chip off the old block, that guy.
No doubt. Hey, listen, let me ask you a question. I don't know if you know this answer, and it just came to me. We say how wealthy Klaus was. At his height, how much do you think Klaus Spreckels was worth? Do you have any idea?
I would be guessing right now, and I do know it's in the book, but since that book, I've written another book. So it's like I don't remember quite. But he lost a lot of money in the earthquake, of course, because you lost so everybody lost a fortune in that earthquake. He died in 1908. The earthquake was 1906. Even then, um, he had a lot of money. He had given $25 million to Adolf and John before he died. So what was left with was up for grabs. One would think, the older brothers, but no, Klaus on his deathbed reconciled with his younger children who he had never known and his grandchildren. He decided those eldest boys, they've had enough of my money. I'm giving it to the younger ones now. And people go, what? Now you love the younger ones? The San Francisco society was flipping out because now who can we put on the guest list? So anyway, those suit each other. He said he disinherited his youngest sons, the ones that had been with him every step of the way, the ones who didn't steal Hawaii from him, the ones that didn't sue him. He's now so all the descendants kept suing each other. And today, because you're a lawyer, you should know this. California's community law is based on Spreckels v. Spreckels.
No doubt. Well, the friends, this is an amazing book. As I may have said in the introduction, this is the best biography I've read in over 20 years. This is just wonderfully done. And what's nice is it's not filled with 6-point fonts. It's not filled with 95,000 notes. I mean, when I read some of these popular historians who put me to sleep, this is a readable book. It's just a wonderful story about a guy we never heard of. So I want to go to that next step. What is next for Sandy Bonura? What's next for you?
Well, I thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. I'm a storyteller, and I have got rid of that scholarly voice with each book. I just like the reader. I mean, people say my books read like a novel, that they have a hard time believing it's real, but that's purpose on my part. I'm I love anecdotal data more than anything. Anyway, so I'm a storyteller. So I hope to keep telling stories, but my mission is to find those forgotten people. Where have you been forgotten? And if you touch my heart, I'll tell your story. And I've just finished another book. It's another forgotten pioneer of San Diego. And so now for the first time in many, many years since I opened that trunk's contents, I'm going to take a little rest and see what happens.
Can I assume that my dear friends at University of Nebraska Press will be publishing that book also?
There's a contract on the table.
Okay, I'm going to be talking to them because I want that next book. I want that book. I can't wait to read that one and have you back so we can talk about that, Sandy. I can't wait.
I
You're
really
wonderful.
appreciate it.
You were wonderful.
You're
You had a wonderful life. Nah, I just I said nothing to do, so I read a lot. But I just friends, as I said, this is one of the best books that I have ever read in a biography or almost anything. It's well done. It's well written. Sandy Bonura, Dr. Bonura, Sandra Bonura, you can call her whatever. She'll respond to anything.
I sure will.
She's done a great job, and I don't want to take up any more of her time, but I want to say truly, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Sandy, for coming on this show. Thank you for making a wonderful, wonderful interview here for us here on Books and Looks.
Oh, thank you for allowing history to come alive. You're the very, very best of the best, and I'm sure you know that.
Well, Sandy, I had such a good time. As I mentioned to you before we even started, I could go 4 hours on this and not even scratch the surface. This man was so interesting and fascinating. And friends, I truly hope that you take the time to look for this book, The Sugar King of California by Dr. Sandra Bonura. Wonderful, wonderful book. You don't want to miss this one. Hey, what am I looking at? Well, now, what's coming next week? Finally, I got Ann Morrissey back. That's right, Ann Morrissey is coming. If you remember, Ann Morrissey was supposed to come this summer, but she got pneumonia, and so she couldn't come. So she's finally going to come back. She's going to talk to us about her wonderful book, Street Fight, set in Chicago, the Taxi Wars. Can't get enough of this book either. I'm telling you, there are some wonderful books out there, and Street Fight's a great, great book, and I'm so happy that she's going to be with us. That's what I'm looking at, okay? So anyway, on behalf of my website, that's viewsonbooks.com, on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks, saying may all your leaves be pages in a book. Bye-bye.